Today is Saturday, December 8th, 2018, and we are in our mini Rohatsu uh, Sesshin celebrating and embodying the Buddha's own great enlightenment 25 to 2700 years ago on this very day. So first to open, I'd like to read you a little quote from Aiken Roshi on koans and their study, just a brief paragraph that I think is really quite incredible. Uh, he writes, it's in Original Dwelling Place, Zen Buddhist Essays by Robert Aiken Roshi, and the chapter is koans and their study. Old grandmothers like Yamada Roshi and tattered texts like the Heart Sutra can set the tone and weave the backdrop for students in the lecture hall. But in the Doksan room, you meet the same master squatting like a dragon in his lair, the texts long since ripped to smithereens. This is the cave where reason is suicide, and the baker simply announces the price of muffins with no exegesis. Comforting words, indeed. So, today we will look at the Buddha's awakening, touching the earth. You know the basics of the Buddha's life. Born into wealth and security, his mother dies within his first week of life. Sheltered from further loss and pain, he's raised by his father, the king, and his mother's sister, his aunt. At the age of 29, he has a kind of breakdown, a positive one. The illusion of security offered by wealth and privilege totally falls apart for him, gets torn up or torn apart like so much wet tissue paper. What happened? Well, he sees a sick man and realizes suddenly that everyone gets sick. He sees an old man and suddenly realizes in his gut that everyone gets old, no escape. He sees a dead man and knows in his bones the terror of facing that final end. He sees a wandering truth seeker walking with dignity and awareness and is convinced that there is indeed a path of freedom that leads from the terrors and anguish of birth, old age, sickness, and death. That there is a way to live that offers peace and wisdom. In fact, he is so convinced of this reality that soon after, he leaves his sheltered life, tearing himself away from a loved wife and newborn son. They are not abandoned. His father's wealth and privilege will support and protect them. But he leaves because he's determined to realize a truth capable of aiding all who suffer this same mortal anguish. Vowing to return once this goal has been gained, he sets off alone into the mountains and forests. He practices fiercely and through a variety of ascetic disciplines comes close to killing himself. Then, after 6 years of intense efforts, he finally sits in Zazen beneath the Bodhi tree. There, as he proceeds deeper into silence, he is attacked by Mara, the tempter, toward distraction and mental wandering. All the internal impulses toward an egotistic life, all its seeming benefits and terrors assail him. He is not caught and just keeps sitting. After a long night of focused zazen in the early morning, he happens to glance up and see the morning star. And with that, all self-centeredness falls completely away and he realizes Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, perfect, complete, total enlightenment. After 3 weeks of sitting there still, simply overwhelmed by joy, peace, knowledge, wisdom, he gets back up and takes on the burden of teaching the path he's realized to others, which he continues to do until his death some 50 years later. That's the essence of the story. So let's look at it all from the foundation of practice. Enlightenment, realization, or intimacy is both the goal and the daily living, beating heart of Zen. Gaining some degree of calm and peace in sitting is good. Just look at the madness of our world if you doubt it. But if calm were all that Prince Siddhartha was looking for, he would never have needed to leave home. He could have visited any local forest retreat. Get your calm on here. The billboards were up all over the place. It wasn't enough. Having personally experienced impermanence, the insubstantiality of every person and thing, a fire was lit in his mind, heart, and gut. After that, he had no choice. He had to keep going until he truly touched solid ground. So I'd like to read you a little piece from Haku on this, which is in Jandaido Luri Roshi's book, Sitting with Koans, Essential Writings on the Practice of Zen Koan Introspection. And he has a nice little thing about the Buddha in here. It seems appropriate for today. At first, he lived in the palace of his father Suddhodana and spent time in pleasurable enjoyment with his wives, Yashodhara and Gopika. His position was that of a ruler. He possessed the wealth of India, and he believed that at death it would be satisfactory to call the name and be reborn in the Pure Land. That is, call the name of the Buddha. This is speaking somewhat metaphorically, anyway, one can imagine the state of his mind when he discarded his position as king, for 6 years engaged in arduous ascetic practices, and suffered the scorn of the hermit Aradakalama, was one of his first teachers when he left home. Later, he entered deep into the Himalaya and fell into so intense a samadhi that he was unaware of the reeds that were piercing his thigh, or the lightning that struck down horses and oxen beside him. His whole body was so emaciated that he looked like a tile bound with rope, and his bones stuck to his skin. Finally, on the 8th day of the 12th month, he glimpsed the planet Venus, and then for the first time saw into his own nature and gained great awakening. At this time, he exclaimed aloud, "How wonderful! All sentient beings are endowed with the great wisdom and virtuous characteristics of the Tathagata." And then he came down from the mountain and expounded in full measure the sudden and the gradual, the intermediate, and the complete teachings. At this time he was venerated as the Tathagata, endowed with the 10 titles and possessed of the perfect, miraculous enlightenment. Again, this is Haku speaking. Is this not what Shan Hui Dashi has described in these words? Suddenly awakening to the source of the mind, the treasure storehouse is opened. Even though ours is a degenerate age, is this not a splendid example that Buddhists today should venerate? If you look for the essentials and the basic content of the practice that has been transmitted from the Tathagata, who appeared in this world through the patriarchs and sages and all wise men and famous monks, let me add, and women, it is nothing other than the principle of seeing into one's own nature. Elsewhere, Haku writes about our own efforts, and he says this: only a few hundred yards from here is a beach, and this is true. His temple in Hara, which Rose and I were at with Sunyana Roshi and her community a couple of years ago. Only a few hundred yards from here is a beach. Suppose that someone is bothered because he had never experienced the taste of seawater and decides to sample it for himself. Sorry for the gender-limited language, but I'm just reading from Haku. So, but please don't. I could add he or she, or he and she, and so on. But let's just put that in our minds and do it. He sets out for the beach, but before he has gone 100 paces, he stops and comes back. Then he starts out again, but this time he returns after having taken only 10 steps. He will never know the taste of seawater that way, will he? But if he keeps going straight ahead without turning back, it doesn't even matter if he lives far inland, he will eventually reach the sea. Then, by dipping his finger in the water and tasting it, he will know in an instant what seawater tastes like the world over, because it is, of course, the same everywhere in India, China, the Great Southern Sea, or the Great Northern Sea. Of course, Haku is speaking about mind, the realization of mind. It's the same everywhere. India, China, east or west, north or south. It's not only Zen Buddhist, but a universal impulse, this desire to go beyond limits. James Stephens in Irish Fairy Tales writes, "The man who keeps putting one foot in front of the other will leave his home behind and will come at last to the sea and the end of the world." The end of the world doesn't have to mean standing at the edge of a cliff looking down at the sea. It could be right where we are, the end of the world. The Buddha, not just in his last life, but through countless previous ones, you're free to take that literally or metaphorically, kept going all the way to the end of the arising of the world, as his enlightenment shows. It is a teaching we too can take to heart wherever we are, whatever we may have realized or not realized. We too can keep going. The essence, as has been said of genius, is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. We do the work. Then we keep doing the work. Kensho, intimately touching the ground of mind, is not the end of the road. Rather, it is a beginning, like walking through a door or opening long closed eyes and saying, "Oh, here's the ground." We can then continue our journey up to high, clear peaks and down into misty valleys, knowing for ourselves now that solid ground remains beneath our feet. In a number of Jatakas, the Bodhisattva sees into the reality of selflessness, the identity of form and emptiness, relative and absolute, and awakes to non-dual true nature. These were all milestone moments, but not yet full realization of original Buddhahood. As Hakuin says in the Zazen Wasan, song in praise of Zazen, from the beginning, all beings are Buddha. We might say, using contemporary terms, that in past lives, Prince Siddhartha had already been a religious teacher, a Zen student, a lay practitioner, an ordained practitioner, a Vajrayana student, a sage, a hermit monk, a community leader, a wandering sadhu, Theravadan monastic, businessman, family man, carpenter, juggler, robber, ox herder, artist, farmer, teacher, caravan leader. The list is nearly endless. He'd also had countless lives committed to ethical practice, whether as human, god, or animal. Buddhist tradition says that regardless of where he was born or what he was born as, whatever challenging life issue he faced, he always chose to go further, over the next hill, beyond the next river, through the next dark forest. Not ignoring a problem, but working with it, he actualized the great way, literally, Maha, great, Yana, way. Onward, further was his nature, as it is ours. It is why the Tao is called the way or the path. Practice realization is not static, but a road that continues endlessly. A Japanese saying sums it up. Even Shakyamuni is only halfway there. This is itself a stunning pointer as to how endless so-called endlessness might be. Zen reveres the story of the historical Buddha's enlightenment because it so dramatically reveals our own potential, even as it reveals the work, the persistence, perseverance, determination, and dedication that underlies all milestone experiences. The Buddha has his own Christ on the cross moment too, when he discovers that his dedication to severe and willful asceticism has not clarified a thing, but only left him bereft in a dark, empty, and useless place. And though the ex-prince sat and sat, in the end, just sitting wasn't enough. There had to be, and there was, a trigger to his deep experience. Realization didn't just come from looking within. It could have been a word, a sound, anything. But what happened is that he glanced up after his long night of focused practice and saw the morning star. Aha! Gone, gone, entirely gone. A morning star now sat on 8 bundles of grass. No one seeing is real seeing. No one sitting is genuine sitting. And the Buddha to be didn't just sit beneath the Bodhi tree. He was poised and open, alert as a cat crouched at a mouse hole. When Mara challenged, he responded. He didn't get caught up, but he didn't ignore it either. When situations arise in our lives, we can't just go off and sit until they're gone. There is a time to act. It need not be a big deal. In fact, it might be wise not to make it, whatever it is, a big deal, but to respond fully nonetheless. The Buddha simply touched the earth and asked the earth to be his witness. He didn't try to muster a list of reasons. He didn't try to out-argue Mara. What he did was exactly right and just enough. There's truth, too, in the take that the Buddha's final obstacle was self-doubt. In a sense, self-doubt is what all obstacles come down to. Yasutani Roshi said that if it wasn't for some form of not giving ourselves fully to it, holding back, self-absorbed and doubting in a not useful way, we'd all have been fully enlightened ages ago. Sometimes, even when people are passed on an initial koan, they can fall into a kind of doubt. What? Can it be? Really? They may think, as long-standing dualistic habits of mind return. Hence the so-called introductory or preliminary koans. And then to really make it not just clear, but our own, the formal books of koans that follow. The voice of Mara is ancient and universal, yet it need not be an obstacle. It's a test. Another Dharma gate we vow to pass through or wake to. I even know a now senior Zen teacher who long ago, after being passed on his initial koan, put himself back on Mu for another 3 years before accepting what he already had. Even some Zen teachers, when initially sanctioned, may go through several years of feeling like frauds, even while they are teaching and guiding others quite well. We're all in the same boat, all members of the same one nose, two eyes society. The Buddha was no different. There's some lovely touches of myth in the story too, as we'll see when we read the account of the Buddha's enlightenment in today's ceremony, like when Kala Nagaraja, the black Naga king, raises his hooded serpent head and linear time falls away. For an instant, we are in the inconceivability of timelessness. The Buddha to be's bowl forging upstream against the current reminds us too that we too must go against the flow of thoughts, concepts, and ideas that form a veil between us and this breeze, this breath, this pain in the knees, if we would awake. The little clink of bowl against bowl in the story when the Buddha tosses his bowl into the water, it forges upstream against the current and then drops down into the whirlpool of the Naga king, Kala Nagaraja, and it clinks against a long row of identical bowls. This tells us its own story. dramatizing the truth that many have already gone down this ancient road. The legend of the Buddha's enlightenment is part of the classical canon and is also an encouragement to our own practice right now. Buddhist tradition says that we all, each one of us, has the nature of Buddha, have exactly the same vast, empty nature of endlessly creative potential as Shakyamuni and all previous and future Buddhas. From the first, we are each fully and equally endowed with limitless wisdom and limitless compassion. And because it is already who we are, if we practice, if we make the effort, then we too can, to one degree or another, realize that is awake to this original mind. Of course, enlightenment is not a thing we get. If anything, it comes from losing, not gaining. Losing what we cling to, losing all that ancient, interior, self-centered stuff that cuts us off from wind, rain, sun, moon, stars, trees, animals, people. I was talking with a friend, another Zen teacher recently. We were Skyping, and we were speaking about failure. You know, people, in one sense, realization is a great success, but in another sense, real realization is like the final failure. I mean, everything falls away. All your stratagems and all yourself, body and mind, fall away. What a loss, complete failure. In another context, Wu Men, commenting on a case in the Wumen Kwan or Mumonkan, Gateless Barrier, says the failure is wonderful indeed. With that wonderful failure, that liberating loss, we find intimacy, which is what we've been seeking for who knows how long. Enlightenment is a name given to our being able to attest to our original unblemished intimacy with sun, moon, stars, wind, rain, snow, clouds, trash, bugs, cats, rivers, mountains, trees, people. We do not gain it because it has never been lost. Like the ground, it has always been here. We just didn't have the steadiness to notice. Of course, it's not that I become intimate with everything. Rather, the so-called 10,000 things step in and replace me. I'm gone. Intimacy is that intimate. As the Prajna Paramita says, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So Zen asks, if we are this enlightened nature, then where is it? Why don't we know it? In Zazen, we bore into such questions like a thirsty person drilling for water. A sonar survey, the life of the Buddha, the Jatakas in Zen teaching, show us that water is there. We have a map, not blind belief. Our map shows that all the water we will ever need is already there beneath our feet. And so we keep at it. We sit and sit. We go to Doksan, hear Teisho. We examine precepts in our daily lives, experience the breath, count the breath, just sit, or endlessly return to koan point after koan point. The Buddha, the ex-prince, touched the earth after lifetimes of practice, as the Jatakas show. For many people too, it may not be until years into their practice and after initial milestones that the gate truly opens and they personally, really know. Still, the Buddha's enlightenment tradition holds was unique, for it was complete. Every level of character and mind fully realized. And it was so because of the countless lifetimes of work the Jatakas show preceding it. In substance, to be clear, every Kensho, the small kind we're likely to realize, and the Buddha's great enlightenment are the same. But in content, they are vastly different. Buddhist mythos says that in this world age, no one experienced more deeply than Shakyamuni, because no one had worked harder or for as long to prepare the ground. He touched not only the ground, but the bottomless bottom and the soaring heights. Comparing our realization of practice, our practice of realization to his, would be like comparing the finger painting of a kindergartner to a work by Rembrandt or Picasso. The substance is the same, both are paintings, but the degree of conscious realization is vastly different. Yet we all must begin somewhere, and for the kindergartner, that finger painting could be just as meaningful as Rembrandt's work was to him. The Buddha's story, his home leaving and forest path exertions, his abandonment by his ascetic disciples, and his solitary face-off with Mara, the primordial force of his and our innate ignorance, completes his many, many lifetime Jataka path. Touching the earth, he gets up and walks on, transcending the final temptation to sit forever at ease in his long-sought realization of complete enjoyment, freedom, wisdom, and peace. Instead, he devotes the next 50 years of his life to walking the dusty roads, teaching those who, while in reality as complete and whole as he, just don't know it. He goes back into the seeming chaos of the 10,000 things, at peace with it all, a half smile on his lips. How could this be? Case 37, Shoyoroku, Book of Serenity, Book of Equanimity, throws some light here. Kuei-shan, Japanese would be Ison, asked Yang-shan, Kyozan in Japanese, suppose a man asks you, how about one who says all sentient beings are in a disorderly karmic consciousness and have no base to rely upon? How would you treat him? Yang-shan said, if a man appears, I call to him. When he turns his head, instantly I say, what is that? I wait while he hesitates, and then I say to him, there's not only disorderly karmic consciousness, but there is no base to rely upon. Kuei-shan said, oh, good. Just prior to the moment of enlightenment after the Buddha-to-be's 6 years of exhaustive effort and endless kalpas of Jataka practice exertions, going the limit, trying and trying with all he had, drawing on the power of his own countless previous efforts, failures, and triumphs, Mara, the Buddhist tempter or distractor, the inner voice of ego, in our version of the account, as you'll see later in the ceremony, takes off his masks and nakedly appears. Mara is worried and makes a last-ditch effort to turn the once sheltered, now deeply determined ex-prince from his goal. So he pulls out his ace in the hole, self-doubt. What? I have this true nature, it is me, and I can realize it? Really? This doubt convinces us to cling to belief in the solidity of a forever separate, winning, losing, interior self, thereby gluing us to what is only provisionally real. Mara confronts the Buddha-to-be and asks, how could you, a sheltered ex-prince, be worthy of the supreme goal of complete and perfect enlightenment? Get real. Better men and women than you have tried and failed. You're young and a beginner to boot. Give yourself time to work at it. Eventually you might have a chance. You've got the basic abilities, but now, no way. Back off, take it slow. It's a reasonable request and reasonable advice. Reasonable as all get out. Devilishly reasonable. Take it easy. Be careful. Go slow and steady. Prepare. Reduce attachments and ego concerns. Be humble. Don't be hasty. At this critical juncture, with worlds hanging in the balance, Siddhartha doesn't waste time arguing with the habit voice of his own separateness, his own predilection towards self centeredness or egotism. He doesn't even try to put together a reasonable counter argument. To enter the fray is to have already lost. Ready? Not ready? A self that gains? A self that loses? A self that has it? A self that doesn't have it? He doesn't get sucked into Mara's metaphor at all. Instead, seeing the joke, probably smiled, maybe even allowed himself the luxury of shaking his head in pity for poor old Mara. Then he reached down and touched the earth and let the earth witness for him. And the earth, witness to countless Jatakas, replied with thousands of voices, speaking as one. Interbeing, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's lovely term, awakes, and Mara is overwhelmed. His last effort to tempt the Buddha to cling to a limited view is crushed. Jataka tales are the record of the Buddha's practice history. It is a particularly long history, said to go back eons, world ages, even big bangs. We too, according to Buddhist tradition, have our own history. Things happened that made us who we are. We stumbled, scratched our knees, got up, let the wound scab over, and tried again. We met with joys and with sorrows. Perhaps our history might also extend back through ages. Where does the path of causation that unfolds as each plant, bug, animal, bird, us, begin? Bodhidharma's one mind precepts states, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. Our nature, the nature that right now hears sounds, feels sensations, thinks thoughts, the nature that gets hungry and eats, tired and sleeps, is wondrous. A cut bleeds, then heals. A veggie burger becomes a thought, a symphony, a heartbeat, a muscle. Inconceivably wondrous self-nature is who we are. Like the ground, it has always been here. At his moment of final challenge, the Buddha touched the earth, the ground. He didn't reach for the sky or beg for help from something or someone above. He didn't fall for Mara's metaphor, try to win the debate and out-argue the distractor. He touched the always present, selfless, sat on, trod on ground and asked the earth to testify to what she'd seen. Her humble, solid response confirms him and overwhelms all doubt. What builds such solid ground beneath us is the work we do now. Roshi Kapleau used to say, if you don't let the Dharma down, the Dharma will never let you down. No effort is wasted. What makes it such a lovely story is that it's not simply ancient history. It's our story. This moment is part of the ongoing Jataka series of the unfully realized Buddhas we each are. Essential nature, mind itself, the ground beneath us, is always here. Past lives, past thoughts, decisions, and events lead to this present one in which we sit, walk, stand, speak, eat, work, worry, create, pick our noses. Come day's end, we say good night and lie down on the ground of our nature, the ground we practice from, have always been standing on, whether we know it or not. And it too is always there, ready to testify for us if we ask it. Our fundamental vow as human beings is to know ourselves. This is why we practice, not to become special thises or that's, but to know who or what we actually already are. Zen Master Dogen famously wrote out the central realization of our practice in a few well-chosen words. When the self advances to become one with the 10,000 things, it is called delusion. When the 10,000 things advance and confirm the self, it is called enlightenment. The 10,000 things are birds, bugs, clouds, mountains, rivers, people, animals, traffic sounds, pencils, cell phones, teacups, raindrops, snowflakes, pebbles, cars, clumps of earth, morning stars. Ordinary things confirm us, tell us, indeed, make us who we are every day. In reality, there is no barrier between us and a single thing. Enlightenment is intimacy, and touching the earth is always possible because real ground is never far away. So we'll stop here, recite our great vows for all, have Kinhin, reset up the Zendo, have Kinhin, and resume our Zazen.